Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today Mooncat is debuting their new DANSE MACABRE collection. This is an 8-piece lineup featuring this dark black swan kind of vibe in a range of different colors and finishes. So as usual, I will save more of my thoughts for the end of the video after comparisons. For now, let's just get into the swatches. The first polish we have is the Silent Scream, which is a silver magnetic that reveals a deep black base when magnetized. I'm not sure how well it translates on camera, but the formula on this was absolutely incredible. Not only was it super pigmented on the first coat, providing nearly full opacity, it also had the smoothest application and formula where it just felt like butter to apply. It just glided on the nail so easily. So it was a joy to paint with it, even though it's such a simple kind of polish being a black base with a silver magnetic. Though I will say the magnetic pigment in this is super finely milled and densely packed, giving it that really lush gel-like look. Then we have Pearl Clutcher, which is a pearlescent white shimmer with subtle shifts through shades of white, light pink, light purple, and green as it's viewed from different angles. I know this is going to be a very divisive shade because pearl polishes just have that reputation to begin with. I don't usually love a traditional pearl finish, so I do always appreciate when a brand does a subtle twist on a pearl, and I've got to say, I really like this one. I know I'm basic, it's boring, whatever, but I think this is such a beautiful, elegant, classy kind of shade. It's kind of giving bridal to me, or especially winter ice queen sort of vibe, so I'm just very excited to pull this out in a couple of months. This also had a lovely formula. It built up beautifully in 3 coats as seen here with a little hint of nail line, and while I could see a bit of that pinky purple color in the bottle, I didn't really catch that on the nail, but I could see the green. Next we have Hell is Other People, and this is described as a dark wine linear hollow filled with a purple pink shimmer. As you can see, this had an incredible formula that was basically fully opaque in just 1 coat alone. I guess that shouldn't be too surprising since the shade is so incredibly dark. I kind of had a hard time telling that the base was this dark wine sort of color. Honestly, to me, it just kind of reads as black or maybe a very, very, very dark purple, but I think that's mainly because of that purple shimmer. And here's a clip under flash so you can hopefully see that wine base color, but more importantly the hollow. It's described as a linear, but it's pretty spread out, so it kind of looks scattered to me. Then we have Heart on a Platter, and this is a deep red linear hollow. So this doesn't have an additional shimmer like the last shade, it's just a dark, vampy blood red. It is so stunning. It had an incredible formula that was very opaque, where I would say you could possibly get away with this in 1 coat, especially if you want more of the red color coming through, which I personally liked, but of course you can do the 2nd coat to ensure full opacity while also deepening it a little bit, almost giving this brownish undertone. Up next we have The Living Doll, and this is described as a sheer blush pink filled with a strong blue-violet shimmer. The formula on this was really nice in the way that it felt smooth to apply, but I did notice it wasn't the most even coverage. I had a little bit of subtle streakiness going on, or patchiness, where it didn't self-level as well as other shades, for example. I would say it was most noticeable on the first coat, where I had the biggest streak down the very middle of my nail, but I kind of saw it a little bit on the right side on the 2nd coat, so I ended up needing a 3rd coat to really even everything out. And this one is still very sheer, but it is so beautiful. Next up we have the Doppelganger, and this is a thermal that transitions from a dark purple when cold, as seen here and in the bottle, to a mauve purple when warm, which you'll see in a minute. It's also filled with a pinky purple shimmer. The formula on this was really nice, very smooth to apply, easy to work with, very even coverage as well, I would say, and more on the crelly leaning side. It's not as creamy as some previous thermals, specifically from the the Remedy collection, but because it's such a dark shade, it did build up to be fully opaque for me in 2 coats. Obviously, I'm running pretty cold here, so after a couple of seconds under the hairdryer, here you can see the warm state, which again, I think looks really even, so I would say it's a solid 2-coater. The next shade we have is Requiem for a Swan, which is a black flaky lacquer filled with translucent flakies and micro holographic glitters. I thought this was such an interesting description because I personally don't see the flakies as being translucent. I thought they were silver, gunmetal in color, kind of like your typical metallic flakies, or maybe more specifically a foily metallic, though it's possible it just looks that way because if they are translucent and they're in a black base, they're gonna look gray. The base in this, by the way, was a little bit jelly leaning, but fully opaque in just 2 coats. And rounding out the collection, we have Clair de Lune, which is described as a light purple magnetic that reveals a dusty purple mauve when magnetized. So to me, that sounds like they're describing the magnetic pigment as being light purple, which I guess I can kind of see, but I just thought it was silver, maybe with a little tinge of purple, but just because of the base color, you know? Either way, it's a lovely shade. I don't know how I feel about this mauve-y purple on me specifically. I feel like it's one of those colors that maybe makes me look dead. So I at least don't love it in the cat eye effect, but I do love this unmagnetized or of course with the velvet effect. It just looked so gemmy. And here is a collage of my thumb swatches so you can get an idea of the color story all together. No surprise, there's a focus on the darker shades of the collection, but even the 2 purples up top I feel like can kind of play the middle ground, though the thermal would push it more into the dark category for me. Now moving on to comparisons, we're starting with the Silent Scream and of course looking at it next to Apparition since that was recently retired, or at least retired earlier this year, but the Silent Scream is supposed to be a reformulated Apparition. So right away from the bottle, you can tell that the Silent Scream has a much stronger silver magnetic pigment because it's just much more densely packed, as I mentioned, and it's going to be most noticeable in the cat eye effect, where Apparition does have a softer magnetic, maybe more diffused, just not as crisp as the Silent Scream. And as far as Imperial Stormtrooper goes, I would say that that's close to being a dupe, but only in the cold state. For other black and silver kind of magnetics, I also had to show this next to ILNP's Moonlit from last year's Ritual collection. They look kind of similar in the bottle, but on the nail there is a very stark difference. Here is 1 coat of each so you can see just how jelly leaning ILNP's formula is. So even doing 2 coats doesn't provide full opacity. It would probably be best to layer it over black. And here it is next to ILNP's Dark Matter, which is a black to red multichrome base with a silver magnetic pigment. So this is a lot more opaque. I'm just showing 2 coats of each, and you can see that the base looks pretty similar. The silver magnetic is not as crisp, but close enough. But like I mentioned, this does have a red shift in more extreme lighting, so I wouldn't call it a dupe. Next for Pearl Clutcher, here it is next to Pixiestick, my beloved. I am so sad that this is no longer around, but it's another very sheer, ethereal, white kind of polish. Though, as you can tell, the main difference is that Pixiestick has a very strong green shimmer head on, while Pearl Clutcher has that stark white kind of speckly pearlescent shimmer. In extreme lighting though, Pearl Clutcher does shift to that sort of greenish color, so it looks similar to Pixiestick in that angle specifically, but Pixiestick transitions from green to blue, so they're not dupes. I unfortunately can't find my bottle of Milky White Shimmer, which I don't think is a dupe to begin with, but here it is next to Holo Taco's Swan Song, which has a milky white crully base, but a blue shimmer. For other pearly white comparisons, I have Cirque's Sylph, which I would say is more like a true pearl. It's very brushstrokey, as you'll see in a bit, and it has a much finer, smoother shimmer. So to match the more speckly shimmer of Pearl Clutcher, I also wanted to show Cirque's Mother of Pearl, which is a magnetic, but leaving it unmagnetized, I feel like it looks a little bit more similar, though the color is a little off, so not dupes. Since Pearl Clutcher doesn't look like a true white in the bottle at least, I figured it would be worth showing it next to Cracked Polish's Skelly Bones, as well as Cirque's Far North, which is a previous limited edition kind of charity shade. Even though that one is just a shimmer and not described as a pearl, I feel like the finish looks very similar to Pearl Clutcher, though it is a lot more sheer, so I'm showing these in 1 and 2 coats. If you happen to have Far North, that's probably going to look the closest to Pearl Clutcher, but maybe with a 3rd coat. And for anyone curious how Pearl Clutcher compares to actual light pinks, here it is next to the Stolen Kiss from the Baroque collection, which that one you can tell is a very soft lilac-y pink, as well as my extremely faded bottle of Curse of Calypso. I felt like these two looked very similar in the bottle, so I decided to just compare those two on the nail, but they don't really compare at all because the main thing that stands out with Curse of Calypso is the golden kind of shimmer. The base is incredibly sheer, so it just doesn't provide the same coverage as Pearl Clutcher does, and you can barely tell it has that subtle pink color. Then for Hela's Other People, here it is next to Antifragile, which was also retired earlier this year. This is another dark purple linear holo, but the purple is more of a blue-toned shade, so it doesn't compare that way. Though the most obvious difference, I would say, is that you can tell that Antifragile is a linear holo, while Hela's Other People just looks more like a shimmer. Since it's a bit of a warmer toned base color, I thought I could show it next to some other warmer toned purples, including Fields of Lavender and Freshly Bitten. Obviously, Fields of Lavender is too light and muted. Freshly Bitten looks a little closer, but not really a dupe. For some cracked purples, I wanted to show it next to Hex Mix, which is their most recent purple, but that one's a glitter formula, totally different, and also a bit more blue-toned as well. So I actually thought the closer shade was Velvet Seat Cushion, even though that's a shimmer, there's no hollow sparkle in that one, so it's not close enough to be a dupe or anything, but in very specific angles, I feel like the shimmer just kind of looks pretty similar in both of them, but the cracked has a much brighter kind of base. Then for Holo Taco purples, I first pulled out Tanzanite Away, which is a lot more blue or indigo leaning in its base with a red shimmer, so not really the same at all. It looks a lot different and darker on the nail. So I thought Dead Petals would be a little bit closer, being a dark kind of burgundy color, but it's not as purple as Hell Is Other People, so I wouldn't call it a dupe. Moving on to ILNP purples, here it is next to Bewitched, which was from last year's Halloween collection. That one is just a purple shimmer, but it's a little bit more red toned and a lot darker of a base color. So I thought the closest shade, or at least the closest to the color, was ILNP's Vanity. This one, as you might know, has more of a translucent jelly base, and it's filled with a scattered hollow flaky. So it is a totally different finish, but I feel like this is the closest shade of purple to Hell Is Other People. Next, for Heart on a Platter, we have to look at it next to Your Heart's a Black Hole, which is a magnetic, but I'm showing it unmagnetized. It does have a hollow sparkle, but that one is a true scattered as opposed to linear. But as I'm sure you can tell, it's a shade or two brighter than Heart on a Platter, so it's not an exact dupe, though I think when I move my nail away from the lighting, it kind of looks pretty similar, but in direct lighting, you can definitely tell a difference. And I thought Lord Vader might be a little more similar, but that one's also a magnetic. So for another deep red comparison, here it is next to the Arsonist, which is just a shimmer polish. There's no hollow sparkle in that one, but I do think it is a little bit more similar to Heart on a Platter, or at least it's in between Heart on a Platter and Your Heart's a Black Hole. But I don't know, on the nail, it kind of looks similar, just minus the hollow. And the only other dark red hollow that I had was Mooncat's Blood Moon, which is a lot more burgundy, not really red at all. I would say the closest to a dupe for this is Holo Taco's Crimson Void, which I think was retired earlier this year or maybe last year, but it's another dark blood red linear holo. I know some people have had issues with their bottle of Crimson Void being a little bit less red and more burgundy leaning. I feel like mine is pretty red, but maybe it is a little less warm than Mooncat. I'm sure you already knew that The Living Doll was basically the love child between Aphrodisiac and A Midsummer's Dream. A Midsummer's Dream is more of a pearlescent shimmer kind of finish. There's no hollow sparkle in that one, while Aphrodisiac has this little dainty scattered hollow and more of a purpley shimmer. I know the shimmer in The Living Doll looks so blown out, so apologies for that, but it's a different color, so not dupes. And here it is next to Holo Taco's Cloud 9, which is another cotton candy pink crelly base, but that one has a much lighter aqua colored shimmer. So if anything, it's maybe a little closer to A Midsummer's Dream. So when it comes to a darker cobalt blue shimmer in the pink base, I immediately thought of Starly's Somnia from their Liminal Dreams collection. There might be some subtle differences in the formula or opacity, but I would pretty much call these dupes. And lastly, for anyone curious, here it is next to Faux's Lotus Blossom, which is another pink with a blue shimmer, but that one's a brighter, almost bubblegum pink. Next for the Doppelganger, the cold state of it at least reminded me a lot of Nightcrawler or Mortals Be Warned. I feel like it's almost an in-between of these two because Nightcrawler has more of a muted gray base, but with a similar toned purple shimmer that like leans a little bit pink, while Mortals Be Warned has more of a blue-purple kind of shimmer that's a lot more multi-chromatic, but the base in that one is darker and a little bit more berry leaning in color. When I first saw the swatch in the collection brief, I immediately thought that the cold state was going to be a dead-on dupe for Freshly Bitten, but as you can see here, Freshly Bitten is a lot more warm-toned and berry-leaning. And in a similar vein, I thought the same for the warm state, where I thought it was going to be a dupe for Lovebomb. So here I tried to do a little gradient, but using Lovebomb and Nightcrawler, but they just don't compare. As I'm sure you guessed though, Dark Omens is probably the closest to the Doppelganger, which makes sense for the name. From what I remember, Dark Omens has a bit of a brighter purple base and it's less dusty, but still very similar. The only other dark purple thermal that I have is Crack's Dead Inside, which does look like it has a similar dark purple for the cold state, but Cracked is a lot more warmer toned, though the biggest difference is the warm state where Cracked transitions to gray and not purple. Then for Requiem for a Swan, here it is next to Mooncat's The Pumpkin King and Holo Taco's Black Hollow Wish, both of which are sadly not around anymore, but it doesn't really matter too much since both of those are these black hollow glitter type of polishes with a much chunkier glitter mix. So while there is a little whisper of hollow sparkle in Requiem, the main thing in that is the flakies, which again look more metallic, almost foily, and I would say that the base is a lot more opaque in that one too. My best guess is that this is a revamped version of the Dark Side, which was described as a black, foily, metallic kind of shade. I would guess this one is more opaque and maybe it just has more variety in the flaky sizes. And lastly for Clair de Lune, here it is quickly next to the Stolen Kiss, which I had pulled out before, but that one, as I mentioned, is more of a soft lilac-y pink that's a lot more sheer and with a green shimmer. I would guess it's closest to Freudian Slip, though to me that one looks a little bit warmer toned. Clair de Lune either is cooler or it's just more muted. When it comes to other purple magnetics, the closest shades that I had were Cirque's Clairvoyant and ILNP's Lily. I would say that Clairvoyant looks to be a similar color, at least at first glance, because Lily has a bit more of a cooler undertone. I feel like it looks very blue or periwinkle here, but in the next clip, once you see it on the nail, it's more color accurate. But both ILNP and Cirque have a true silver magnetic shimmer, so you can kind of tell that the Mooncat does have like a light purple color. They are also very different in their base colors once you magnetize them, but even unmagnetized, I feel like Mooncat leans slightly pearlescent, so that made me think of comparing it to Cracked Polish's Lilac Frosting. This is their version of a pearl finish, which is very soft and not as brushstrokey as traditional pearls. If you like the look of the Mooncat in the unmagnetized state, I feel like the Cracked Polish is a great alternative. It is a bit lighter and brighter though, so not an exact dupe either. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons of Mooncat's Danse Macabre collection. As always, I can't wait to hear what your thoughts are on this release, because from what I've been reading online, it seems to be pretty mixed, which I guess, to be fair, is true for a lot of Mooncat's recent releases. Personally, I do like this dark, moody aesthetic. I feel like it feels very Mooncat, and I really appreciate the range of shades as well, where we do have a couple of lighter kind of shades, so there's really something for everybody. And I am aware that Michelle did publish a little statement kind of saying what to expect with this collection, where they're sort of like classics but elevated or with a Mooncat twist, and I can appreciate that, but I think I do agree with a lot of the feedback there, where I don't really want just classics or elevated classics from Mooncat. I know there's a time and place for them, of course, but from this specific brand, you know, that's never afraid to push the boundaries, I know I'm not alone in saying that I would love to see just more experimental kind of finishes, especially for the higher price point. Now, I can definitely say that over the years, I have noticed an improvement in Mooncat's formula, where the most recent collections have really felt like the best formulas application that I've experienced from them. So I know they might seem more justified or just worth it to some people because the formulas were exceptional, assuming though they are in your budget. Unfortunately for me, if Mooncat didn't send me these in PR, I would not be able to afford them. And I feel like, you know, as beautiful as the shades are, they didn't really wow me either, which is kind of just what I expect from them. So all in all, I do think these are lovely shades. They had amazing formulas that were really impressive. I just can't justify the price personally, but you know, for people who can, and these are within your budget, I think you would be really impressed with them. But for everybody else, I can completely understand how these are just not super exciting maybe. So you'll just have to let me know what you think down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!